There's 2 points I want to make before I start talking about the different types of exemptions and the way absentee voting works. First of all of these exemptions or exceptions that we're going to talk about don't apply when you're voting in person on Election Day. On Election Day, you have to show acceptable ID in order to cast a ballot. Or the second circumstance is in person in the clerk's office. These exemptions we're talking about here don't apply when you're voting in person in the clerk's office. My only exception to my exceptions, of course, are confidential electors. David's going to explain a little bit about confidential electors in the next section, but confidential electors are individuals who, because of being victims of stalking or abuse, do not want their address listed on the poll list or publicly given out because, like we said, your voter information, not how you voted, but that you voted and you're registered, your name and address is public information. There are some electors who don't want that because they are victims of stalking or assault, so they can go into the clerk's office and apply as a confidential elector. They have to show some documentation from an officer or a judge or a court that they are a victim of stalking or abuse, and they can be put on a confidential list. Those individuals do not have to show ID ever. They're exempt. So everybody else, though, no matter what, if they are at the polling place on Election Day, have to show your acceptable ID. Show up to the clerk's office, want to vote in person, have to show your ID. All right? If you are a military elector who are away from their residence on Election Day, you're exempt. So if you vote absentee ballot by mail as a military elector, you're away from your residence, you are exempt from showing photo identification. So they're exempt. And overseas voters are also exempt from showing identification when voting by absentee. It should be noted, though, and overseas voters, as defined in Wisconsin, are people who are permanently overseas or permanently in a foreign country. Canada counts. So I know sometimes people forget, there's not a C that you go over, but Canada is still, if you live in Canada, you can still be an overseas voter. But you are a U.S. citizen who permanently resides in a foreign country and has no intent to come back to the United States. That person votes for federal-only offices, and they're classified as overseas voters. Other people who might be taking spring break down in Mexico or studying abroad for a year, those individuals, because they intend to come back to their residence in Wisconsin, they're not considered overseas voters. Even though their location puts them in a foreign country, they're just considered regular absentee electors. So this exception for overseas only applies to people permanently in a foreign country. If you or someone you know is going to be temporarily in a foreign country and they want to vote by absentee, they're going to have to provide a copy of their acceptable ID in order to get an absentee ballot. So these exceptions are only for people who vote absentee, for military or permanently overseas electors, and are confidential electors, like I said. So then there are some groups of people who can provide a substitute for photo identification when they're voting absentee by mail. I'm making it by mail because it's different if you vote in person in the clerk's office, you still have to show your acceptable ID. Those indefinitely confined electors can vote by mail and provide a substitute document. The substitute that I'm going to talk about today, all of the documentation that provides a substitute for photo ID is actually going to be put on the absentee envelope that the elector returns with their ballot. So there's no additional piece of paper or something else that they need to find. It is all of the substitute documentation is already built into the absentee envelope that the elector returns. So indefinitely confined electors are people who, due to age, disability, or illness, certify that they're indefinitely confined to their home, to the assisted living facility, to a nursing home, to their child's home. You can be indefinitely confined basically anywhere you live. Nursing homes can be indefinitely confined, but they have special rules. I'm going to talk about our nursing home electors in a second. So if you're indefinitely confined and you apply to the clerk as being indefinitely confined, you certify by signing your form you are indefinitely confined, then by completing your envelope, and there's a copy of the envelope on page 43, the elector signs the certification of voter section, They have one U.S. citizen witness sign the witness section, and the witness is basically certifying. They certify the name and address of the voter is correct as shown. That is the extra documentation that they need that meets their photo ID requirement. So indefinitely confined electors do not need photo identification. So if you know people who are confined to their home, have difficulty getting around, or they're on their clerk's permanent absentee ballot list, they're only supposed to be on that permanent list if they've certified as indefinitely confined. So there are some people who are already on their clerk's list, who are already getting ballots for every election. They don't have to go and get a photo ID. They just have to fill out their envelope like they normally do, and that meets their photo ID requirement. That's indefinitely confined electors. So instead of photo ID, they just have to make sure they properly fill out their envelope and their witness can certify that that person is who they say they are, and they don't need photo identification. Then we have this line that says, voters in care facilities visited by special voting deputies. What does that mean? I don't know. You tell me. Well, there are certain care facilities, assisted living, nursing homes, there's retirement homes, adult family care homes, that a clerk can decide to send what we call special voting deputies to. Now, nursing homes, the clerk has to send special voting deputies to, which means that the special voting deputies go to the facility, and two voting deputies appointed by the clerk, both go into rooms or the common area and administer absentee voting at that nursing home. It has to be done at nursing homes. And then other facilities, like a retirement facility or an assisted living home, the clerk can decide to send special voting deputies there if he or she believes that the voters in that facility would best be served by special voting deputies. What happens, though, is if you have an assisted living home and the clerk decides to send special voting deputies there, everybody has to vote through the special voting deputy. Nobody can get their ballot by mail anymore. So a lot of times the main place that special voting deputies are visiting are nursing homes, because other facilities, people prefer to be able to vote by mail. They don't want to have this special voting deputy coming and administering voting in the place that they live. It's a little bit more independence when you get it by mail and you can decide when you return it. The special voting deputies come at select times and administer voting at those times. So, mainly in nursing homes, when special voting deputies are visiting the home, on that same form, you see that underneath the certification of witness, there's a spot for two signatures. Both special voting deputies have to sign as witnesses. And the same as with our indefinitely confined, when both special voting deputies sign, that meets the photo ID requirement for those nursing home electors or other electors who are served by special voting deputies. So nursing home electors, you don't have to take them to the DMV to get a photo identification because the special voting deputies completing the form meets their photo ID requirement. Both deputies have to sign. So that's their substitute document in lieu of photo ID. And then we do have those individuals who are in the assisted living facilities or adult family homes, and special voting deputies don't go there, which is the case in most places. What happens is the elector can always provide a copy of their photo ID, or if you look at page 43 again on our envelope, there's a special section on the bottom left-hand corner, certification of care facility authorized representative. The facility, the assisted living facility, adult family home facility will authorize certain people to sign the residents of that location's absentee ballot with the name of the facility and the signature of that representative. That meets the photo ID requirement for individuals in those types of facilities. So instead of photo ID, people at assisted living or other care facilities can have a representative sign their envelope in lieu of photo ID. Of course, the voter and the witness sections still need to be filled out. So those two sections are always required. And then in addition, that care facility section would have to be filled out if that elector does not have photo identification. So those are the three cases in which an elector voting absentee by mail can, in fact, can provide a substitute instead of photo identification. Remember, if anybody who qualifies, if I live in an assisted living facility and I go into the clerk's office to vote in person, I have to have an acceptable ID to show before I can vote in person in the clerk's office. These exceptions and the substitutes only count when someone's voting absentee by mail. What we call regular absentee voters are basically everybody who's not indefinitely confined. Those people who have to request a ballot. As an absentee elector, you can request a ballot for 1 election, 2 elections, or you can request an absentee ballot for all elections in a calendar year as a regular absentee elector. When you send in your absentee application, you need to provide a copy of your photo identification. The reason that we have 1 and 2 up here for regular absentee electors who request by mail and regular absentee electors who request by email or fax is because there's a difference. To keep things nice and interesting, right, we've got a little bit of a difference here. So if you mail in, this is how you're requesting. As an elector, how you request a ballot. So I mailed my clerk my absentee request. I have to include a copy of my photo ID with that absentee request in order for that clerk to mail me a ballot. Okay? If I emailed my clerk or faxed my clerk my absentee ballot request, if I can either provide a copy of my ID with my request, but if I didn't, the clerk can still send me a ballot and instruct me to include my copy of my photo ID with my returned absentee ballot. So if you request by mail, you have to have that ID with the application. If you request by fax or email, you can either provide it with the application or you can provide it with the ballot. Then, once you provided that copy of the photo ID with 1 absentee application, you do not need to provide a copy of your photo ID with any other absentee ballot requests that you want that ballot mailed to you unless you change your name or move. So I sent in a copy of my photo ID for requesting a ballot for the February election, and I include a copy of my photo ID. Then when I ask for a ballot in April, I do not have to include a copy of my photo ID because I provided it with a previous election. That only, though, counts for when you're requesting a absentee ballot by mail. When you show up in the clerk's office, the fact that you gave her a copy of your copy of your ID doesn't matter. When you're voting in the clerk's office, you always have to show your ID. When you're voting at the polling place, you always have to show your ID. But when you're voting absentee by mail, you just have to send in 1 copy of your photo ID, and that counts forever unless you change your name or your address. So you guys are all looking like you understood that 100% and you're ready to go and tell everybody else about it. I know, it takes a little bit. I think I gave this presentation about 5 times before I understood it too. But it's that 1 request, that 1 copy of your photo identification that counts for all other absentee requests, but it only counts if you're voting absentee by mail. And like I've been reiterating, in person in the clerk's office, you always have to show your acceptable photo ID. And your clerk is going to make a little initial on your envelope that he or she saw it. We have some special absentee electors. People who can vote a presidential only ballot. If you know somebody who's moved into Wisconsin less than 28 days before an election, so they can't go back to their old residence, they're from out of state and they've moved to Wisconsin less than 28 days, they don't meet the residency requirement. They are still allowed, though, to vote for presidential only. So they do have to apply, they have to fill out special forms, but they can vote for a presidential only ballot if they move to Wisconsin in less than 28 days. The same happens if someone moves out of Wisconsin and they move to Colorado and they've only lived there for 5 days and they can't meet Colorado's residency requirement, then they can still request a ballot from their old clerk, but they only get to vote presidential only because they don't intend to return to their old residence in Wisconsin. They can only vote for president. In that case, those electors still have to provide a copy or show their photo identification. Hospitalized electors also have to show identification, and the same with sequestered jurors. and those are special circumstances. Hospitalized, if up to 7 days before an election, you or somebody you know is hospitalized, you can fill out the absentee application and have an agent complete a section of the application, and that agent will go to the clerk's office on your behalf and actually get an absentee ballot and take it to the hospital for you. But you do have to fill out the correct part of the form, and identification is required. This is what their absentee application looks like. The JAB is called a JAB 121. We pulled up the section here where you can identify which elections you want a ballot for. This is also where you certify if you're indefinitely confined. So if you or someone you know is indefinitely confined, this is a section of the application that they fill out the oval certifying that they're indefinitely confined due to age, illness, or disability. Indefinitely confined does not mean you can never leave your house. It means you would have difficulty getting to the polling place on election day. You have a difficulty getting places. That's what indefinitely confined means. And we already talked. No, they are not. Thank you for. The forms are not in the materials, but you can find them on our website if you're interested. Are there any questions? Any questions you want to ask now about absentee voting? Did your question get answered, Special Voting Deputy? Question get it? Okay. You're welcome. We got a question here?
I have a question.
Okay. Go ahead.
How can I learn whether I'm on a regular absentee ballot list or if I'm on the indefinitely confined list? And who can find out that information? Do I have to do it as an individual, or can I do it on behalf of someone?
That is public record because it's an absentee list, and so you can find out on behalf of someone else, but you ask the municipal clerk. The municipal clerk, you can call, some of them have emails, and ask if this individual is on the indefinitely confined absentee list. You can't request information such as why they're on the list, what is their disability, things like that. But the absentee list and who receives an absentee ballot is public record. So you can ask the municipal clerk who's on that list, that permanent absentee list.
Okay, my question was about the absentee ballots. I guess in the past, I was always under the impression that someone else could not pick up your absentee ballot for you, that they could bring you the application, but then the clerk had to mail the absentee ballot. Now you're saying an agent can come in and pick up the ballot for you?
The only circumstance in which an agent can come and pick up a ballot for you is if you are hospitalized. They're a hospitalized elector. So it does not count if I'm sick on election day and I can't make it to the polling place. Can I send someone to pick up my ballot? No, you cannot. The only time someone can pick up your ballot on your behalf is if you're a hospitalized elector and you fill out that application and the agent has to sign certifying that that person is hospitalized, you know them, and that you're taking that ballot directly to them. So that's the only circumstance in which that can happen.